Claude responded. I drove home from Sacramento International on a Tuesday evening in March with a garment bag over my shoulder and the particular fatigue of a man who has spent I drove home from Sacramento International on a Tuesday evening in March with a garment bag over my shoulder and the particular fatigue of a man who has spent 3 days convincing insurance adjusters that a roof really did fail the way. The report said it failed. I had been making this drive for 26 years. Senior claims director for Cornerstone Mutual, the regional insurance firm I had helped grow from a 9-person office to the largest independent adjuster network in 3 counties. Trips to Reno and Fresno and sometimes down to Bakersfield, never more than 3 days, always home by Tuesday night. 26 years of the same rhythm, 3 days gone. Tuesday home. The house on Larkspur Court with the porch light on, and Marilyn's sedan in the garage, and something with rosemary in it, filling the kitchen. Before I even opened the door, I turned onto Larkspur. Marilyn's car was in the garage. The door left half open the way it never was. The house was dark, except for the kitchen. I sat in my truck for a moment the way you do when something about a familiar street feels wrong before your mind can tell you why. The jacaranda tree out front was budding the way it always did in March. Same terracotta roof, same brick planters she'd filled with lavender every spring since we bought the place. Everything in its place. From the driveway, I went in through the side door, the one that opened straight into the kitchen. The rosemary smell was there, coming from a chicken still in the oven, forgotten, drying out under a low heat that had probably been on for hours. But the kitchen table was gone. Not moved, gone. The chairs, gone. I walked into the living room and the couch was gone, the recliner was gone, the entertainment console was gone, and the photographs that had lined our hallway for 31 years, our wedding at Rancho Santa Fe, the kids at Yosemite, her mother's 95th birthday. Every frame was gone, and only the picture hooks remained, sticking out of the wall like something had been pulled off in a hurry. And then, on second thought, not in a hurry at all, because the hooks were straight, unhooked one at a time, carefully. I walked through the dining room, through the hall, into the bedroom, where the bed frame remained but the mattress was gone, where her side of the closet had been emptied down to the wire hangers, still swinging slightly, as if she'd only just finished. There was one thing left on the kitchen counter, set beside the stove, like it had been placed there deliberately after everything else was cleared away, so I'd be sure to see it first. A cream-colored envelope, sealed, my name written across the front in her handwriting. Not Walter. Not Wally, what she'd called me since we were 22. Just my full name. Walter Anthony Brennan. Formal, the way you address a stranger, or a man you've decided you no longer know. I looked at that envelope for a long time before I touched it. I am not, by nature, a man given to drama. 26 years in claims work teaches you that the story people tell you in the first 5 minutes after a loss is rarely the whole story, and that your job is not to react to it, but to read it. I read this one. An empty house. A chicken left in the oven, meaning she had been cooking as recently as this morning, meaning this had been planned down to the hour of my flight, so the house would look occupied right up until the moment it wasn't. A car left in the garage with the door open, meaning someone had picked her up and she hadn't wanted the neighbors to see a stranger's car in the driveway. And an envelope, addressed formally, left where I couldn't miss it. I opened it. Inside was a letter, 4 pages, her handwriting, careful and looping the way it had always been on birthday cards and grocery lists for 31 years. And behind the letter, folded once, a printed statement from Pacific Crest Trust, confirming a transfer of $294,000, dated 6 days earlier, out of an account that had been ours since 1997 and into an account I did not recognize, at a bank in Sedona, Arizona, held by a name I did not recognize either. I set both papers on the counter, next to the drying chicken, and I stood in my kitchen of 31 years, surrounded by the outline of everything that used to be there, and I did the thing I have done professionally for a quarter of a century when a claim doesn't add up. I stopped feeling it, for now, and I started reading it. What the data said was this. My wife had not left in a fit of anger. She had not packed a bag in a single afternoon and driven off overwhelmed. She had executed a plan with a start date and an end date, a plan that required weeks of quiet packing, one careful trip at a time, so the house never looked different enough for me to notice on any single Tuesday. She had moved money 6 days before telling me anything. She had cooked a chicken this morning so the house would smell like a normal Tuesday for as long as possible. What she did not know, standing wherever she was standing right now in Sedona, Arizona, was that I had been reading the data on her for 11 months. She thought she had emptied a house. She had emptied a house. But what I had done with the things that actually mattered, in the 11 months since I first understood what was coming, was something she had never accounted for, because she had never once, in 31 years, seen me operate the way I operate at the office. She only knew the version of me that came home and mowed the lawn and asked how her sister was doing. She had never seen Walter Brennan build a file. Hey folks, if you're new here, welcome. I tell true stories, mine and the ones people trust me enough to share, and I'd love it if you'd stick around, hit subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I read every one of them. Let's get into it. I need to back up, because none of this makes sense without the 26 years underneath it. I started at Cornerstone Mutual in 1998 as a field adjuster, driving a company sedan to hailstorm damage and kitchen fires, and the occasional total loss. Learning early that the people who lie to you about a claim almost never lie with their words. They lie with the gaps between their words, the things they don't mention until you ask a second time. By 2011, I was running the Central Valley office. By 2019, I was senior claims director for the whole region, overseeing 40-some adjusters and a book of business that made me, without ever intending it, one of the more comfortable men in our particular stretch of Sacramento suburbs. Marilyn and I married in 1994, in her parents' backyard in Davis, with a string quartet her mother insisted on, and a cake that melted a little in the June heat. She was 29. I was 30. We'd known each other 4 years by then, which is long enough to think you understand a person and short enough to still be finding out you don't. She was a kindergarten teacher for 11 years before our first daughter was born, and after that, she ran our household the way I ran a claims office, with a calendar for everything and very little tolerance for surprises, which is a kind of irony I did not appreciate until much later. We had 2 daughters. Renee was 34, a physical therapist outside of Portland, and she called me every Sunday evening at 6, a habit she'd kept since college that had never once broken. She had told me, gently, in the careful voice adult children use when they're not sure a parent wants to hear something, that she'd been worried about her mother for the better part of a year. I told her I'd heard the same worry in my own chest and hadn't known what to do with it yet. Our younger daughter, Kayla, was 31, lived 20 minutes from us with her husband and our only grandson, and had occupied, without ever asking to, the impossible middle ground of a child who loves both her parents and cannot be asked to pick a side in a war she didn't start. The first thing I noticed, back in April of last year, wasn't anything specific. It was a pattern, the way patterns show up in a claims file, before you can name what's wrong with it. Marilyn had always left her phone face up on the kitchen island, the same spot, for as long as we'd had smartphones. That spring it started going with her into the bathroom, into the garage when she went out to get something from the car, into the guest room when she said she wanted to read without the television on. I didn't say anything. I noted it the way you note a line item that doesn't match the invoice. And I kept watching. The second thing was her sister in Prescott. Marilyn had visited her sister twice a year for as long as I'd known her, February and September, 4 or 5 days each time. Last year she went 3 times. And the September trip stretched to 11 days, described as helping her sister recover from a hip replacement that, when I mentioned it to my own sister-in-law over the phone in December, turned out to have happened the previous spring, not in September at all. The third thing was a conversation over dinner in May, when Marilyn asked, almost offhandedly, what I thought Cornerstone stock options and my pension were currently worth, and then followed it with 2 or 3 more specific questions about vesting schedules and survivor benefits that a person doesn't usually ask unless they've been thinking about them for longer than a dinner conversation would suggest. I answered honestly, because I had no reason yet not to, but I filed the questions away with everything else. I called my brother-in-law, Pete, who had gone through his own divorce 9 years earlier, and who I trusted to tell me the truth without flinching. I told him what Marilyn had asked. I didn't tell him what I thought it meant. I asked him what he thought it meant. He was quiet for a second, and then he said, "Walt, that's not a curious wife question. That's a lawyer's question, and somebody gave it to her." I said, "I know." He said, "Are you telling me you think she's planning something?" I said, "I'm telling you I'm watching something, and I want a second set of eyes." He said, "What do you need from me?" I said, "Right now, just this conversation. I'll let you know." I sat in my truck in our own driveway for a long 10 minutes that evening before I went inside, holding what I had: the phone, the trips, the retirement questions, and one more thing I hadn't told Pete because I hadn't told anyone yet. In March, our home laptop had been open when I sat down at it, and an email in Marilyn's inbox had been visible in the preview pane. The subject line long enough to read at a glance: "So good to finally see you again after all this time." The sender was a name I didn't know, Gary Whitfield. I didn't open the email. I closed the laptop and did what I'd sat down to do, and I spent the next 2 evenings doing the kind of quiet research the internet allows anyone patient enough to do it properly. Gary Whitfield, Sedona, Arizona, 62 years old, a retired commercial real estate broker, and this was the part that stopped me cold. A name I recognized from a high school reunion photo Marilyn had shown me 4 years earlier, laughing, her arm looped through his in a way I had noticed at the time and decided not to think about, because what kind of man goes looking for trouble in a photograph from a high school reunion? 4 years before the empty house. It turned out the story had already started. I sat with that for a long time, and then I called a family law attorney a colleague at Cornerstone had used in her own divorce, a sharp, unhurried woman named Diane Vasquez, whose office was above a coffee shop in downtown Sacramento. I asked her one question: if I believe my wife is planning to leave and to make a claim against my retirement and my share of the business assets I've built, what do I need to do right now? She said, "Come in Thursday. Bring every financial document you have, all of it." And I brought everything. What Diane Vasquez told me over 3 sessions that summer reorganized how I understood my own marriage. She said, "California is a community property state, Walter. Anything earned during the marriage is split 50-50. Generally speaking, regardless of whose name is on it. Your pension, your deferred comp, the house equity built during the marriage, all of it's on the table. What isn't on the table, if you can document it properly, is anything demonstrably premarital, and anything you can show was deliberately kept separate and can prove wasn't commingled." She said, "The most important thing you don't have is a prenup. The second most important thing is clean documentation, starting now, of exactly what's yours, what's marital, and where the lines are." She leaned forward. "If you believe a departure is coming, and you believe she's already consulting someone, the timing of when you start protecting what's legitimately yours matters enormously. I am not telling you to hide anything. I'm telling you to document the truth before someone else gets to write the only version of it." I spent the next several months with our accountant, a precise, unflappable woman named Renata Ibarra who had handled my finances since 2005, tracing exactly what had come into the marriage with me, what had grown independently through my Cornerstone stock options that had vested years before the wedding, and what portion of everything else belonged, unambiguously, to both of us together. Diane reviewed the file in the fall and said it was the cleanest asset picture she'd built with a client in 15 years of practice. Then she asked me the question that changed the whole shape of my preparation. "Walter, have you thought about the joint accounts? The one with the $280,000 in it as of last quarter." I said I hadn't. "Not specifically." She said, "Either of you can move that money without the other's permission. I'm not telling you to move it first. I'm telling you that in a situation like this, sometimes the person who feels cornered moves first, and you should be prepared for what that looks like if it happens." I didn't move the joint funds. I didn't want anything I did to look, later, like something improper. But I did open an individual account at a separate bank and began, over the following months, redirecting my personal earnings there instead of into our shared accounts, which Diane confirmed was entirely legal and, more importantly, entirely honest. By this March, that account held $61,000 I had documented, dollar for dollar, as my own individually earned income. The joint account held $294,000 that Marilyn had apparently been watching just as closely as I had. She moved it 6 days before I came home to a chicken drying out in the oven and an envelope with my full name on it. I read her letter a second time after I'd absorbed the transfer confirmation. It was 4 pages, and she was, I'll say clearly because it's true, a genuinely good writer, better than I ever gave her credit for during 31 years of grocery lists and birthday cards. She wrote that she had been unhappy longer than she could pinpoint, that she had tried in small ways to say so, and I had never quite heard her, that she had met someone she didn't name him, though I already knew who made her feel like a person again, instead of a fixture in someone else's life. She wrote that she wasn't asking me to forgive her because she understood she hadn't earned that. She wrote that the lawyers would sort out the financial side, and she hoped we could avoid making it uglier than it needed to be. She wrote that she was sorry, twice, and that she hoped I'd be all right, and that she knew the house would feel strange to me now. I set the letter down next to the transfer confirmation. $294,000, 6 days ago, to Sedona. While I was 300 miles away arguing about roof damage, I called Diane Vasquez. It was 5:45 on a Tuesday. She picked up on the second ring, which is what happens when your attorney has quietly understood for months that this call was eventually coming. I said, "Diane, she's gone. The house is empty. She moved $294,000 out of the joint account 6 days ago." A short pause, and then, "Are you at the house right now?" "Yes. Don't touch anything else. I need photographs of every empty room and that transfer statement in the next 20 minutes. Can you do that?" "Already doing it." "Good. I'm filing an emergency motion tonight to freeze whatever's left in that Sedona account. We may not get all of it back, but the motion sets the record straight from hour one. Walter, listen to me. 11 months, we've been building toward exactly this moment. The documentation is done. The premarital equity is documented. The individual earnings redirection is documented and clean. We're ready for this." I said, "I know." She said, "How are you doing? Really?" I said, "I'm steady. That's what's useful right now." She said, "That's enough for tonight." I spent the next hour photographing every bare room, the picture hooks with nothing left hanging from them, the closet down to the wire hangers, the chicken still cooling in the oven, because apparently even a careful planner runs out of time for the small things. I noticed my own side of the closet was untouched, every shirt still on its hanger, which told me something about how this had gone. She'd taken what was hers over weeks, quietly, a trip at a time, never enough on any single day for me to catch it happening, until the level in the house had simply dropped below the point where you could pretend nothing had changed. I called Kayla from the empty living room floor because there was nowhere left to sit. She picked up on the first ring. I told her what I'd walked into. She was quiet, and then she asked, very steadily, "Dad, how long have you known something was wrong?" I said, "About 11 months. I've been working with a lawyer since last June." She asked if I knew about the man in Arizona. I said I'd known the name since March of last year. Another silence. Longer this time. "You didn't tell any of us." I said, "There was nothing worth telling until there was something I could actually do about it. I needed to be ready before things happened, not scrambling after." She said, "Are you okay, Dad?" I said, "I'm functional." She said, "I'm coming over right now." I told her it was a 20-minute drive and she didn't need to. She said, "I'm bringing dinner." "Don't eat that chicken. It's been sitting out for God knows how long." She arrived 40 minutes later with takeout from the Thai place near her house and a folding chair from her trunk because there wasn't a single place to sit in the living room. We ate on the floor. She didn't say much at first, just sat with me the way her mother used to sit with people in hard moments, before her mother had become someone I no longer recognized. Eventually, she said, looking around at the bare walls, "It's just stuff, Dad. You can replace stuff." I said, "I know." She said, "You built this whole life once already. You'll build it again." I said, "I know that too." Then she asked what the lawyer had said about the money, and I told her. And she asked about my pension, and I told her that part too. And somewhere around midnight, the empty house stopped being the scene of the worst afternoon of my year and just became a house that needed furniture, which is, in the end, a solvable problem. The divorce process took just under 9 months. Diane Vasquez was every bit as thorough as Pete had promised she'd be. The documentation we'd built over 11 months carried the entire case. The premarital vesting on my stock options, the clean paper trail on the individually redirected earnings, the timeline connecting the Sedona transfer to a departure that had clearly been in motion since a high school reunion 4 years earlier. Marilyn had retained an attorney in Prescott, competent enough, but working from a position our preparation had already narrowed considerably before he'd even opened the file. The court found that the $294,000 transfer, made days before she filed, constituted a dissipation of community assets, and ordered it returned to the estate for proper division. She received a fair portion under California law. I received a fair portion too. My cornerstone stock options, documented as vested before our marriage began, were excluded from the community property calculation entirely, which Diane called, without much emotion in her voice, because she doesn't waste emotion on wins she saw coming, about as clean a result as this kind of case ever produces. There was one afternoon during a deposition in Diane's conference room, in the winter, that I still think about more than anything else in the whole 9 months. Marilyn's attorney asked me why I'd opened a separate account and started redirecting my salary a full 11 months before she filed for divorce. I said, because by then, I had reason to believe a divorce was coming, and I took the appropriate legal steps to protect what I'd individually earned. He asked when, exactly, I'd first believed that. I said, last spring. He asked what had led me to that belief. I said, several things I'd been noticing for months, how she started keeping her phone with her at all times, the increase in trips to see her sister, some very specific questions about my pension, and a name I saw in an email in March, Gary Whitfield. The room went still. Marilyn was sitting across the table from me for the first time since that Tuesday, and I hadn't looked directly at her until that moment. I looked at her then. She was staring at the table. Her attorney said there were no further questions on that topic. I glanced at Diane. She didn't change her expression at all. She didn't need to. What had actually happened in that room wasn't about the money, not really. It was the moment Marilyn understood that she hadn't been the only one quietly building something for the last year of our marriage. She had believed she was the one managing a secret. She had been standing, the whole time, inside a situation I had already mapped from the other side. The house on Larkspur Court sold that spring. We split what the court said we should split. I bought a smaller place on the other side of town, a 1960s ranch house with good bones and a detached garage. I've slowly turned into a wood shop because working with my hands on the weekend is the only thing that's ever actually cleared my head, and lately my head has needed clearing more than usual. Kayla and her husband bring my grandson over most Sundays. Renee flies down from Portland every couple of months, and we sit on the back patio and talk about nothing in particular, which is its own kind of good. I've thought a lot, since March, about something my daughter Kayla said to me sitting on that empty living room floor with Thai food going cold between us. It's just stuff, she said. And she was right. The photographs, the furniture, the dining table we'd bought the year Renee was born, all of it replaceable. What actually mattered, the pension I'd spent 26 years earning, the equity I'd built honestly, the relationship I still had with both my daughters that stayed intact. Not because I got lucky, because I'd spent 11 months making sure luck wouldn't have to be the reason. I should tell you one more thing, because it explains more about me than anything else in this story. My first wife, Renee, and Kayla's mother, whose name was Linda, died of an aneurysm in 2009, with no warning at all, in the produce aisle of a grocery store on an ordinary Thursday. Kayla was 12. When you lose someone that way, with absolutely no time to prepare for it, you learn something that never leaves you. The things you can't control will take everything from you in an instant, with no notice at all. So the things you can control, you prepare for completely, without waiting to be sure you'll need to, because the alternative is standing in an empty house, holding a piece of paper that tells you what someone else did to you, with nothing of your own to hold up against it. My own father told me once, a long time before any of this, that the difference between a man who gets knocked down and stays down and a man who gets knocked down and is back on his feet before anyone else in the room has caught their breath isn't strength. It's whether he saw the hit coming far enough in advance to already know what he was going to do the moment it landed. I saw this one coming. I decided what I was doing about it 11 months before it happened. And on a Tuesday evening in March, standing in an empty kitchen holding a transfer confirmation that was supposed to be the thing that finally broke me, what I actually found in my hand was proof that the work I'd already done was enough. That's the only kind of document that ever really matters, in the end. Not the one that tells you what was done to you. The one that proves what you built before anyone had the chance to take it. The woodshop out back is coming along. My grandson likes to sit on the workbench and hand me screws while I work, which is worth more to me most Sundays than anything I could have kept from that house on Larkspur Court. There's always a next project when you've spent your whole life in a business built on knowing that things break and people need to be ready when they do. Right now, it's a set of bookshelves, good clean joints, built to outlast whatever comes next. If this one stayed with you, tell me in the comments which part hit you hardest, and let me know where you're tuning in from tonight. Hit that subscribe button if you're new, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and I'll see you in the next one. Claude responded, "Being prepared isn't about expecting the worst from the people you love. It's about making sure that no matter what life hands you, you're never left with naught. Being prepared isn't about expecting the worst from the people you love. It's about making sure that no matter what life hands you, you're never left with nothing but grief and no ground to stand on." Walter didn't lose himself in that empty house. He'd already spent months quietly building something steady underneath him. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for your future self is simply pay attention and act while there's still time. A small note for you. This story was written and fictionalized by AI for entertainment purposes, while still hoping to share a genuine, positive life lesson with you.